Hey everyone, I am Kat B.
And I'm Angel Street.
And we are the hosts of the webcast UFO.
But we love coffee and UFOs.
Hi, I'm Stephen Bassett, Executive Director of Paradigm Research Group, and I'm a really big supporter of coffee and UFOs.
In this episode, I welcome Paola Harris, co-author with Jacques Vallée of the book Trinity, The Best Kept Secret, to discuss the alleged 1945 UFO crash landing in San Antonio, New Mexico, 1 month after the first atomic bomb was detonated at the Trinity site just 40 miles away. Now, after listening or after reading their book, do you believe there is enough evidence gathered to warrant further investigation? And did a crash recovery actually occur before either the reported Aztec or Roswell incidents? Welcome back to another episode of Coffee and UFOs. I have a very special guest with me, Paola Harris. Paola Harris was born in Rome in a family of Italian diplomats. She holds a bachelor's degree in English and French from Rhode Island College, 1967, and a Bachelor of Science from the University of Colorado, 1980. Her master's degree in education is from Lesley College in Boston, Massachusetts. She served as the principal of the American Overseas School of Rome in 1994 to 1995 and taught American history, photojournalism, and English there until she returned to the United States in 2007 to pursue her interest in investigative reporting in the field of unidentified phenomena research. From 1980 to 1986, Dr. J. Allen Hynek entrusted her with his UFO investigations outside the United States. She has published interviews of many military witnesses concerning their experiences. In particular, in 1997, Miss Harris interviewed Colonel Philip Corso in New Mexico and became his editor and confidant. She was instrumental in having his book, The Day After Roswell, which I brought with me for this interview because this is one of the first books that really, pushed me into the deep dive of reading ufology. The Day After Roswell, for which she wrote the preface and translated it into Italian. Her nonprofit association, Starworks USA LLC, brings American speakers to Italy and promotes disclosure and international dialogue. Her research trips to Colombia, Argentina, Chile, and Peru are included in her regular column for X Times magazine in Rome. Welcome to Coffee and UFOs, Paola. How are you?
I do have coffee. Here it is.
Hey, cheers.
Christmas cup, but it's coffee. I'm glad you mentioned Colonel Corso, Alan. We were just talking before the show about this because I was the journalist that came to the 50th anniversary of Roswell, and by accident had the room next to Colonel Corso, and he became a very close friend until he died. And actually, this is the book on Colonel Corso. It's called Conversations with Colonel Corso, and it's got his Army records, his military career. And then what I used to do, which I have to do with everybody, is I had a tape recorder in my pocket. So everything that he told me is word for word in this book. And that's the only way I do my interviews. I'm so afraid of making a mistake that I just have tons of audio.
Well, in the book Trinity, Jacques Vallée actually, mentions that, how you do your interviews. And I think you do the right approach, right? You ask questions, you interview, you let them tell their story, then you go back and it's like you ask the same question in different ways, ask them to revisit in different parts of the timeline, which, am I right? Does that help jog the memory as well?
Yeah, well, I have to make sure they're telling the truth. So I'm not going to add anything there that they didn't say, and I make no judgments. And sometimes, I mean, I've interviewed so many people, they come up with concepts that I like, time travel and stuff that I have to wrap my mind around it. But I'm not going to censor it. But with Colonel Corso, I did, because Colonel Corso, when I met him, he told me that he had had an encounter with an ET at White Sands. And I, that was the first interview. And I said, I'm not printing that. I said, if I print that, they won't even look at the back engineering. They won't even look at the fact he was in the Pentagon in the 1960s and had and under General Trudeau was for the Army. Now, remember, this is only for the Army. He had the artifacts. So, yeah, a lot of these people have had contact. And with Trinity, you might need to begin talking about how I got involved with Jacques with Trinity, because I had been working, and I was even telling you, I had brought a MUFON team down there before. I had been working on it since 2009 for 5 years. Nobody paid attention to this case until Jacques Vallée, and here's the cover, the new cover of Trinity revised, because I found now a fourth witness. So, I was just working on it. I had heard about it in Italy. You just mentioned my background in Italy. Well, I came back to live in the United States in 2007, but I had read about these two little boys who lived in New Mexico near Socorro, who in 1945, 1 month after the atomic bomb, were fixing fences and looking for a calf, that had just been born. And they witnessed during a thunderstorm, and it's so important because people say, well, why did these things crash? And the thunderstorms in New Mexico, Alan, are outrageous. You can see the lightning go right to the ground and everything. And there was a thunderstorm in August, I think it's 16th of 1945. And these two little boys, one Jose 9 and Remy 7, are they're under a kind of a cliff, and they're watching this thing come in from the Trinity site, which is the white sand site where the bomb had just been, it wasn't tested. It was actually blown, if you read the book, blown up. And they watch it come in, take out a piece of a radio tower, and control land. And so, of course, the little boys, they're very curious. They think it's an airplane. I want your audience to understand 1945 is before Kenneth Arnold. It's before the Army Air Force was one. It's before Roswell, which was 1947. So there was no reference anywhere, not even for the boys that cleaned it up, on UFOs. And on top of it, it's avocado shaped.
Which is to say that they had no frame of reference regarding flying saucers, because Kenneth Arnold was the one who, well, he didn't actually, say that they were flying saucers. He described them as more like crescent shape, but that term was, populated, and we all assumed that that's why people see what they see, right? Because they're influenced by whatever the media says. But this is interesting, because these two boys, and I think, what were they, 7 and 9?
Yeah, they were 7 and 9. Of course, they're not going to read anything, but but apart from that, there's nothing in the media. It was Kenneth Arnold with his, sighting in Mount Rainier in June of 47 that brought the whole flying saucer problem to the world.
Yes. Well, before we go further into this story, what is the background to flying saucers, UFOs? Before all this, even before 1945, are there records that would affirm that what these people saw in the future dates, were similar, had similar behaviors, looked similarly? Because often the argument we hear is it all started in 1947. Before that, there were no UFOs.
Well, that's not true, of course. I don't know if you can get this book, but, Ryan and Bob Wood is a member of a MUFON, very respected, put out a book called Magic Eyes Only with 93 UFO crashes. And they start way back, Cape Girardeau and so forth. You have to look at, so I had that book because I got to tell you, Alan, I don't understand how anybody could study this without studying it as an academic subject. You can't take one case, or you can't take one little thing that happens and make judgments on that. Sure. You have to You have to go back. You have to go back. Actually, you want to go really back with UFOs, you have to go to ancient aliens. And you start with ancient aliens, the visitations, the Mayas, the Aztecs, the representations in Egypt. And you got to go way back. I don't want to do that part because it's too much trouble, even though I know about it. But, the thing is, the book, Magic Eyes Only, if you get it online, has 93 crashes. And the 1945 crash was in there. It was in there. I happened to see it. I looked at it, but it was hard to believe. See, the reason why I wanted my colleagues to do it is because this had the exact location. Roswell does. It has 3 miles of strewn debris, and you can actually see the mark of the UFO on the ground if you go there. Mm-hmm. And it has the location. It had the 2 witnesses. We have 4 now, and it had metal, and that's why Jacques Vallée got involved 5 years later. I was working at it for 5 years. I couldn't get anybody. They won't get off the old stuff, what's tried and true. They won't look at the new. And then Jacques contacted me and said, "You have metal." And I said, "Yeah." The 9-year-old went inside the craft and pulled out a bracket about this big that was on the wall. I have the metal. He gave it to me as a gift, and it was in a bank vault for 2 years. And then I gave it to Jacques, who's examined it at Stanford. And it ultimately will go to Rice University. All my archive, you can see the drawers behind me. All of my archive, I have 2 sets of drawers. All my work is going to Rice University in Houston, and that piece will go there too.
So let's go back a little bit. So these boys, they were ranchers.
Yeah, they were. It was Jose Padilla's father had leased from the Bureau of Land Management 180,000 acres. At $99 a year back in those days. Wow. I know, it's like anyway, and they were looking for the cows, but they were also involved, which really helped the story if people read it. It's so beautifully written by Jacques. They were involved in the Owl Barn Cafe, and the Owl Barn Cafe was the only watering hole for the Manhattan Project. So behind the Owl Barn Cafe are the cabins of Oppenheimer and all the guys that were working on this. And when I go into the Owl Barn Cafe now, and I asked them about those days, they said they didn't tell us they were scientists. We thought they were traveling salesmen because they always had leather briefcases when they came in. Plus, there was a soda fountain, and there was a grocery store. So it was it's on the crossroads of the Pan American Highway. The crash itself is 3 miles from there. It's like the boys knew everybody that was cleaning up the crash because they would go in there. In fact, at the time, Jose was driving the truck at 9 years old. There were very few men around, if you read the book, because they were in World War II. So he used to get hamburger for the Owl Barn Cafe, which has these great, chili hamburgers. And so the thing is that they were they saw what was happening, even though it was top secret. And when they were watching the Army Air Force do the actual recovery, they knew who was cleaning up, but they had to hide because their father had said, keep away from that. And the Army had said they needed to cut the fence near the cattle guard because they were taking out a weather balloon of 30 feet. So, the cattle guard was 6. And that mark, that's right there. Right there, you could see where they cut it.
So these 2 boys, is their testimony reliable? Because they were apart for decades before they really started talking about this. And since they were 7 and 9, how does one trust that their memory is still intact?
Well, you asked such good questions. First of all, they didn't want to talk about it because they stole something. They took something. And if the 9-year-old went in there and took something, and the Army came to the father and said, we find something missing, did your children take it? And if you read where they put it under the sheepherder's shack. You're not going to talk about this. You are not going to talk about this. So there's a lot of synchronicity. So what had happened is that Jose had moved to Rowland Heights, California, and Remy had moved to Gig Harbor, Washington. And I went to see Remy before he died and got his testimony. They were separate, so I got two separate testimonies of the very same detail. So they had been away for 60 years, but Jose's son does genealogy, and by accident or design, he found the genealogy of Remy's family and put them together. He said, oh, Remy is now living in Gig Harbor, and they got together. And of course, the first thing they said, Alan, is, do you remember what happened?
Right. And to put that into context, in that area, there are really only a handful of families, right? That kind of settled in that area.
Yes. And I, by accident or design, because it's all synchronistic, got a call from the son of the flyover pilot. And he talked to me about his father. And then only once he said, the last thing my father did was that recovery. And I said, oh my God, I read about that in Italy. I don't know why my colleagues hadn't jumped on that. And he provided the details for, these two little Indian boys, but they weren't Indian. They're Hispanic. But the father had seen them on horseback. Well, of course, they're going to fly over because a piece of the radio tower was taken out. But then you mentioned that there was they were families. Well, I don't know when the craft went over the radio tower and the panel came off, there was 10 pounds of angel hair strewn all over the mesquite there. So the boys saw it was all lit up in colors and there was no electricity. So they put it in a bag. They take it home and they trim the Christmas tree with it, put it on the windows. They have no electricity. This stuff is all lit up in purple and pink and everything. And so what they did was give it to everybody in the neighborhood where they lived, and I've seen their house where it was.
So look, the avocado-shaped UFO. There's a thunderstorm. Something happens. Perhaps it's struck by lightning. We don't know. It comes in at a low trajectory. Thank you. It hits this tower, and then soft crashes into. Okay. And so the boys, did they actually see it come down, or did they just hear the sound and then go after the craft?
No, they heard the sound and thought it was a second atomic bomb. They lived through the atomic bomb, and the description of, oh my God, it's so bad. Because
this is a month after Trinity, right? I think.
The atomic bomb was a month before Trinity. That's why there was a Trinity.
Right.
That was a statement against the atomic bomb. And Jose's mom opens the door 4:30 in the morning and she's blinded in one eye. And Jose loses his eardrum because that atomic bomb, all the results of it is 150 mile radius, and their farm is 13 miles away, and the crash is 13 miles away. It's 150 mile radius. They're right there. And so they thought it was another one because they heard the thud, and then they get on their horses and go to where it is. And you can see Trinity from the two little hills where it is. And they see this thing that there's no frame of reference. They don't know what they're looking at. They just get off the horses. They go really close with binoculars. There's a lot of fire and there's a lot of, fire on the mesquite and smoke. And they see a panel that's missing with three little beings, sliding back and forth.
And these are boys with adult responsibilities. Is that why you trust?
Oh my God!
That's why you trust their testimony more than?
No, I trust their testimony because they lived apart for 60 years and have the same story. I don't think they called each other to get all the details. The details in this story, if you read the book, the detail is incredible. It's something they never forgot, but it's also something they were not supposed to talk about. I mean, these guys don't care about, in our field, it's a media hype. It's I call it a media circus. It's like who has this and don't share stories and who has the latest of everything. These guys weren't like that. They were just ordinary citizens. And Jose did something he really wasn't supposed to do. And, and they went on with their lives. And Jose became a state trooper for California. So am I
Yeah.
going to trust him? Yes.
Well,
Yeah,
and
of
also
course.
they shared their stories for a number of years while they were still living together as up until teenagehood, right?
Well,
So
15, but
yeah, so
like 7 to 15, 15 years old, they moved away, and at 16 they got married. I mean, in those days, it was
it was
totally
very different.
different world,
Yeah.
completely.
Oh my gosh. I mean, thank goodness no one married me at 16. That would have been bad.
Well, I can't believe it either, because the fourth witness I have, Ellen, he
Hmm.
was a 15-year-old who was married and had a child, and he was in Faustino Padilla's house. And I just found him in March. He didn't know Jacques and I wrote a book. He didn't know about the crash, but
Yeah.
he did all the testimony on what we call the angel hair. I'm not going to call it fiber optics, but
Hmm.
on the angel hair, because he's the one that trimmed the Christmas tree. And and Jacques asked him in detail what it was like, but this guy at 80 years old had no idea who Jacques was. He had no idea
Yeah.
who about the crash, and he had no idea, about that this was something unusual. So that is pure testimony that we have.
Is it true that Jose, or was it Remy, that reached out to Stanton Friedman and other ufologists, and they just didn't want to look at the
No,
case?
because first of all, our field has become really commercial. And Roswell is it. I mean, there shouldn't be, that's it, Mecca and everything. And it's if we had gotten together, we could have put some pieces of the puzzle together with the Roswell people. It would have been amazing, because we could sit at the table and say, they told us this, the Army acted like this, and so forth and so on. But what happened is, in order to do this story, you have to go there. You have to, every time I go to Socorro, and I've been there maybe a total of 12 times, it costs about $500, because I have to go on an airplane, I have to rent a car to get there, and I have to stay in a hotel. And nobody does that anymore. And the only person that does that besides me was Timothy Good. And Timothy Good is what we call the field researcher. So you're not going to go up to a researcher and say, do you want to spend that much money to do something and figure it out? They just don't do it. They just don't do field research. And so Timothy Good, whom I think is the best in the world, he's now retired, went to Gig Harbor, Washington to talk to Remy Baca. And that's the guy we got to look at, because he put it in his book. I think it's Earth and Alien Enterprise. And he went and he talked to him in detail. And besides Ryan Wood and his father, this has been recorded by them. But in order to do research for 9 years, you have to spend a ton of money. And God bless Jacques, because even though Jacques wanted the piece, he wanted pieces. He said to me, Paula, I got to go to the location. Paula, I got to talk to these people. Paula, I want to see the Bureau of Land Management. I want to see the Native Americans. I want to see Trinity. I want to stand at the point where the bomb went off. So God bless Jacques Vallée. He came down there the last 4 years, at least 3 times a year.
That makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it? Being on site, talking to the people, getting a lay of the land, than looking at pictures or reading about it.
Oh God, I can't even imagine doing a story like that. I know this case so well, and I know the location, and I know where everything was. And Ellen, this is not a UFO book. It's a story that really happened. This is a book of the history of planet Earth, a reaction to the atomic bomb. And that's why it's so important. It's a historical book. It goes into the historical archives. And because Remy worked for the governor of Washington State, I told you he was in Gig Harbor, because he worked there, the governor of Washington State was Dixie Lee, and he helped get her elected. So in order to thank Dixie Lee, what she did was show him his case. And you'll never find it, because it's in the annals of the Atomic Energy Commission, because there was no blue book and there was no Air Force. So she showed him the case really fast. And she said, thank you for electing me. And we're dealing with the Atomic Energy Commission files, which are the best kept secret ever. Even the president can't look at that stuff. And so we had to do, and then since I've been talking about this, I've had people contact me who work with Dixie Lee at the Atomic Energy Commission. She was the head of that in Washington. And she was, so you have to connect the dots. And what's really interesting is there's so much detail that people can follow up on, but we can't actually find the files because it took a week to take that thing out of there, through the weather balloon out of there, to take it to Alamogordo. And not only that, they had no protocol. So you picture these boys that both little kids knew, with country music, with their Jeeps there, and they didn't want to pick up too much. So they made a little hole and threw some of the pieces in.
Yeah.
And they were, they didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah. So let's put that into context too. So the boys, they see this crash, right? And, or after it crashed, they see the craft. They're peering at it from how many feet? Something like 30 feet, 40 feet away, something like that?
No, I think they were more like 200 or 300 feet away, but they had binoculars.
Okay, gotcha.
They could see everything.
Okay. All right. So they see this craft, and there's some hole in it, right? Where they actually
the panel. It was a panel. It was like, it looked like a panel, even though there were no rivets. There were no, because, not only did Jose go in there, Jose's father and Sheriff Apodaca went in there the next day. So there are people who went in that craft.
Oh, I knew that one of the boys went in there, Jose, right?
Jose.
But I didn't know the adults went inside.
Well, yeah, it's in the book, because they went home and said, we saw an airplane that crashed, and so
I must have missed that. Yeah.
Yeah, the father called. We got the names of everybody. The father called Sheriff Apodaca. The next day, they went in for 45 minutes, and they came out, and there was nothing in there the way Jose said, except this panel on the wall that had two circles, a copper and a silver, and attached to circles was the bracket that rotated. And, they went in there, and then they were told not to go back to, the Army Air Force came over and said, we need to be on your property to take the weather balloon out. So they had constant communication tasks for the cattle guard, but they didn't know. What they didn't know is that these two little mischievous boys were watching the whole time. The flatbed come in, flatbed truck, and Jacques is so detailed in there. He is counting the wheels and how much it weighed, and it had to go kind of sideways to get under. There's an underpass near there. It had to get under that underpass. So the amount of detail here is because people saw it.
Right. Yeah. But the boys estimated the size, about 15 feet in diameter, 30 feet in length.
30 feet circular and 15 feet tall, gotcha. And 15 feet tall.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, with a dome. So Jacques is looking at, and Jacques did it amazing. He's looking at the Lonnie Zamora case that has an avocado-shaped craft, and that's in there because that changed Hynek's mind about studying ETs because of Lonnie Zamora in the 60s, and it's 10 miles away.
Yeah.
And then I was in France this summer myself, because that's what I do. And I went to Valençol, that case, 1965 Morris Mass, avocado shape with a dome with two little beings who picked up lavender from the lavender fields. And Morris Mass, who was the farmer, was going to hit them because they were 3 feet tall, 65, and 1965. The three cases are in here with that shaped craft. Jacques also, he was the investigator for the French case. So what you have here is a history book, and of all details, and he goes into the idea, which is the saddest of all, Alan, that bomb test a month before was a real bomb. It wasn't a test because it was exploded from the ground. And Hiroshima and Nagasaki were less damaging because they were exploded from the air, but that the Emperor of Japan had already surrendered before we did Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He's got it in the book. And so that was kind of, we needed to test the bomb on people. and then it gets really hairy, because I'm convinced that if we hadn't done this story, this would have gone lost in history. And I'm also convinced that whoever was in that craft somehow had the foresight to know that this story was going to be covered. Otherwise, why crash?
Yeah, that's what I love about ufology. When you're doing research, it's much more than just a UFO. You're learning history. Like in Hiroshima, it was the bombs. They changed the pressurized, I guess, system so that it would explode at 2,000 feet. But when they tested in New Mexico, it blew up on the ground, which spread
Yeah, well,
radiation.
it was more powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even up until recent years in the 80s, I think they were testing, and there's radiation contamination in
Well,
some of
yeah,
the.
no, all the residents. Well, they told them that they had blown up an ammunition dump.
Mhm.
So years later, when a lot of people are complaining that have leukemia, then the animals were taken, I think, to be tested after this. This was the entering of the atomic age. So this crash is important. It's a
Yeah.
statement from somebody. I'm not going to go into whoever it is. But when we
Well,
explode an atomic bomb, it affects other cultures, other dimensions, and other realities. And it's not a little thing. So I love what we did, because it's a statement. It's
mhm.
like, what were you thinking? Because now in 2023, everybody has nuclear, but we play a chess game. And the only way to win is checkmate. Everybody has to
Exactly.
have it, or you don't win this, because then you all threaten each other and nobody, or maybe somebody will do it.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than ufology, Alan. It's so much more than
Yeah.
UFOs. This is a history book with detail.
Yeah, it's great. And it's not hyperbolic. I'll say that for sure. But it does entertain some ideas like you were just mentioning. Uh, are these craft slash ETs, whatever they might be, coming through as a response to our nuclear detonation in 1945? And my second question is, are you a fan of David Lynch? Are you familiar with his work? Okay, so he had a series called Twin Peaks in the 90s. He's done other movies as well. But very auteur kind of a director. And his most recent updated part 3 of the Twin Peaks series in 2000, I think it came out 2016 on Showtime. He really dives into this idea that his evil character from the original seasons was spawned from the explosion of the first atomic bomb, right? But he often has incorporated references to Project Blue Book, and so this intersection of kind of paranormal and ufology in his work, and that idea of this interdimensional opening. I don't personally know if I can believe. I don't see enough evidence that an atomic bomb itself opens a porthole, but it sounds to me like we got somebody's attention, and maybe that's why they came through, not because we forcefully opened a portal.
No. I think we got somebody's attention. I think that a lot of the sightings, especially
Mhm.
ones over Ukraine, and there's a lot of them. By the way, I run a conference in Laughlin, Nevada called the Starworks USA Conference. It's November 11th through 13th. And I have some very, very serious people there. And one of them is Jaime Maussan, and he's going to be showing the UFOs over the Ukraine. I don't think that they go on vacation. I don't think they pick the Ukraine. I don't think they pick New Mexico for vacation. I don't think they picked in 1969 Maelstrom Air Force Base to shut down one nuclear missile after another. I don't think that was their vacation situation. So I don't think it's the same. I don't think it's the same necessarily visitation. They could be different visitations from God knows where. But the thing is that the historical context of the nuclear problem on this planet is concerning to somebody, if it isn't to us,
So that's the problem then, because we've always struggled with how can there possibly be so many crashes? I mean, these are extremely intelligent and advanced species of whatever. How can they be so naive as to crash in a lightning storm and what have you. But then, so then we're left with this idea that it's intentional.
Some is intentional and some are shot down. Some are definitely shot down. They're in Latin America. I was very close to Clifford Stone, and he did 12 crash retrievals, 3 of which were in Vietnam. That's why I'm so into. I helped publish his book, Eyes Only. And he talked to me extensively because he not only saw the dead ETs, he met the live ones. The live ones in Vietnam that he described to me. They were watching the war, and he's passed on now, but everybody respects him. He's a military man, and he was indoctrinated into the Army because of his telepathy, because he had contact, and because in his 12 retrievals, he was with another group, a secret group that would go in there and deal with this. One of the things he told me, Ellen, and there's just so many conversations I've had with these people. He said the last one, he said that they left the bodies out for their own to come and get them because they had already bodies. Had already, in other words, there are bodies somewhere and everything. So he said, we left the bodies out because everybody says when Apodaca and Jose's father went back in, where were the ETs? Well, maybe their own came and got them. We don't know.
So was there a precedent then at that point for them to assume that these beings would come and get their own?
Not in 1945. There is today. There was today, according to Sergeant Clifford Stone, that actually did this work. Wow. I'm not going to talk to hypothetical people that are throwing out what I call the UFO mythology out there. There's so much mythology. I mean, the mythology of UFOs right now is they're either grays, reptilians, or they're Nordics, and we've shoved them all in boxes. Well, there is no box for this. And James Fox movie just came out on the Virginia case, and that little thing didn't look like any of those.
Right. Oh, there's so many.
It had protuberances. It had red skin, and they took it to the hospital to have an operation. So, by the way, James Fox's film is going to also screened at Laughlin on November 11th. But the thing is, you can't look at things as with a human point of view and put it in a human box, because this is the weirdest stuff that you will ever deal with in your entire life. And if you do the human thing, you're narrowing it down. And the answer is, for me, who's been working on it in the field, in Latin America, in Bogota, in Argentina, in Peru, there is no box, and we don't know what's going on.
Yeah, my friend Race Hobbs from KGRA always says that we have human brains trying to wrap around our minds around something that's not human, and it's almost impossible for us to understand it unless we're maybe told what it is. But someone like Philip Corso in 1947 and others, when the Roswell crash takes place, did none of those people, or did some of those people, were they privy to what had happened? Because it seems to me Corso maybe didn't know about it. And how is that possible?
Because if you have a crash, first of all, the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy are all separate. They're all vying for contracts even today, with the Tic Tac stuff and everything. I mean, these are in competition. Corso, it makes it very clear to me, it's just Army. He said, we wanted to get a competitive edge over the other branches. And so the Air Force is not going to talk about it. That, maybe the Air Force got the pieces, got the whole craft, and they're in 45. And why would they tell everybody? Because a problem with disclosure is that if you're keeping the secret because of the technology, why are you going to tell the world that's where you're making the money? Corso was a real hero, because he not only named what he had in his tray, but he said the Army was back engineering this. But the Army was back engineering it in 1960. That's when he was given the stuff. So what the 20 years before, where'd all that stuff go? And if I'm talking to you like this, but my dream is to have an intelligent conversation with university people or people that are not in the necessary media, or in the and try to figure some of this out. So the secret at that time, because when I met Corso, I didn't know why it was kept secret. I thought it scared everybody. And remember, I was in Italy, so I was talking to Monsignor Balducci, the Vatican, and everybody else. So the thing is that I didn't know, and he made it very clear. This is a money-making situation. This is in the deep, the military-industrial complex. Even Eisenhower said that. The Congress, the president, the Congress has nothing to do with this. And I don't think we're going to have disclosure that easy if that's what it is. Because Corso said to me, what we thought about making arms for war.
Yeah.
They weren't thinking of, giving free energy, or he said he had a pen about this big and that it would cut the skin, but it also would suture it, which means it would, put you wouldn't need stitches. And so and I'm going, okay, well, you had that in 1960. Who has that now? He said, well, now the Russians got some of that and they're using it for that. So I'm thinking, okay, well, we don't know the details of this unless you talk to the people that are actually involved.
So these two boys, right? They see the craft. They're looking at it. They see aliens through this panel that gets knocked through. Apparently, maybe it hit the tower, whatever happened. Maybe it was lightning bolt. Something knocked this panel out of the craft, so they could see inside. And before they or anyone else went inside the craft, before the army arrived on site, they saw three beings. And what did those beings look like?
Well, they saw three beings that they thought were kids, just like them. And they said they had oversized heads. They had almond-shaped but insectoid eyes, that they had long spindly arms, and that they were floating back and forth. The thing that Jose told me, which he can't make this up, he said they were made a screeching sound like a baby crying, or when you kill a rabbit just before it dies. He said he'll never forget it because he wanted to go help them. He thought they were hurt. But Remy, who was 7, started to cry because he was scared. So instead, they were there for like 20 to 25 to 30 minutes. And that kind of detail was incredible. And I'm glad I got to Remy, because this will blow your mind. The vision that Remy got from them, they had telepathic abilities, was people falling out of a skyscraper. And Remy had never seen a skyscraper. So if you read the book in detail, there's all these details. Why are you showing a 7-year-old who had never seen a city, people falling out of a skyscraper? And he said he never forgot that vision. Well, that sounds like September 11th to me, but I'm not going to make that statement.
Of course,
it just sounds like that.
But he had haunting images that seemed to be coming from these beings.
Yeah, so these beings are not going, to the Caribbean to sit around under palm trees. When we talk about visitations or contact and everything, it gets so, confused that the whole field doesn't understand. I asked Clifford Stone, I said, what do you think is really going on here? He said, I think they're cosmic anthropologists. And I love that. God bless Clifford.
So then these boys, we know that period of time, like you said, is maybe around 30 minutes or something, because they stayed too long. They needed to get back home, and they got home late, which was confirmed by their father. It was like, hey, they were worried. Where are you? So I'm just saying that because I know as a kid.
No, it's in the book that they got home late. They had to explain. Yeah.
Oh no, yeah. I'm just verbalizing that for the listeners, because even now as an adult, when you're entranced, time can seem like much longer than it actually was. But they had a way of verifying that they were actually there for a longer period of time observing this craft, which is not like seeing a sighting in the sky.
No,
where it lasts 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. They had plenty of time to think about it.
And it's not like Roswell either, or any other crash that we know. This is why this book is so amazing. It's like nothing that I've ever researched.
So these boys, they go back home. Their father eventually goes. You said the sheriff eventually goes.
The next day.
The next day, and then they go back, the boys, after the army has arrived on site to retrieve this thing, using an A-frame, trying to load it onto this big bed truck, which they had those sizes at the time because that's what they would have loaded, these like atomic test bombs or other devices. Okay, and so the the army guys go to the Allen tree for a break, whatever.
Barn track. Yeah, that was
Allen Barn,
yeah. The girls there, and there was it was a soda fountain, and they're young. They're 18, 20.
Yeah, and they're not wearing hazmat suits or anything because this is like brand new for them. Okay, so
brand new for everybody. Yeah.
And the boys have had time to figure out, okay, they're going to be gone for a while. We can go and check this out. So then what happens then?
Well, they want a souvenir. And in Spanish, they called it a tesoro. So, and Jose is like that even today. So he says to Remy, let's jump on the truck. I'm going to go in and get the souvenir. And he gets a crowbar, which he calls a cheater bar. And he goes inside, and right near the inside, there's a panel, like I explained. It's a square panel with two circles. And this thing is revolving, and he just takes it, the crowbar, and pulls the bracket off. And the picture of the bracket is in the book, and that bracket's going to what do you call it, Rice University. But so he pulls it off. They run away. And if you read the book, it's really funny. They put it under the sheep herder's shack. They put it under the floorboards of the sheep herder's shack that the sheep herder was part of Remy Baca's family, because that's why they hired him. And he comes in the next morning and he says, I have to move away, to the father. And he says, why? He says, because 3 little homocitos came in looking for the tesoro. Well, when we have that, then I'm wondering if that piece belonged to the army, then what were 3 little homocitos coming in through the wall? And the sheep herder has to leave. And I've been to the sheep herder's shack. It's really rustic. It's adobe. And I'm going, okay. They took me actually to all the places, all the things that are nominated in there. Not they, but Jose, because Remy died. I didn't start this story until after Remy died, because unfortunately Remy wanted attention for it. And the minute that, he had died, and his it was, in my mind was, he died, the other one dies, you're not going to know anything. So we went down there to the crash site, and believe it or not, I went with James Fox. So James Fox has seen everything. He was the first one to film it. He's the first one to interview Jose, and we did the work, and that's all we needed to do. There was no book thinking. I wasn't thinking of a book. I wasn't thinking of anything. When I do a story, I just want to put it in the history books. That's it. My books are all history. But out of the clear blue sky, by accident or design, because I started working with Alan Hynek in 1980 to 86 until he died. I never dreamed that the end of my career, I'm going to be working with Jacques Vallée. I mean, it's so bizarre to me. I can't even think about it. But the scientist, he's strictly a scientist. He the last 4 years with him has been amazing. And his beauty of writing, his writing like a novel. This reads beautifully. He put it in a book, and he used my interviews. So that's what I can tell you.
Yeah, and real quick, for anyone who may not be familiar with Jacques Vallée, he is a trained scientist. He was a part of many people, but developing early AI programming.
Right. Exactly.
He helped with the first mapping of Mars.
Right.
He's been around and investigating UFOs since the 60s.
But he had a sighting at 15 years old, and I didn't. I didn't have anything.
Yeah. And so between your two minds and your research, I just love how the book kind of amalgamated into something that's utterly palatable, but also packed with evidence and reflection, which is something that's really interesting in this book, because as you're reading along the way, it pauses, and I don't know if it's how much it's Jacques' voice or your voice, but it's reflecting on what was just shared with the reader and helping to, like, okay, this is what we told you. Here's probably your doubts. This is what we think about that, and then you continue on. And I absolutely I love that rhythm.
That's all Jacques. That's all
Jacques. Okay, yeah, it's awesome. It's a great way to read.
Yeah.
So, okay, so eventually this avocado craft is taken away by the army. Now, this bracket that they stored away and you still have, yeah.
Jose gave it to me as a gift. I mean, he said, Paula, he said, I'm 84 years old. I don't know. His family didn't even know about this, you know. I mean, so he said, just do something. And I put it in the bank vault for 2 years until Jacques came along.
Well, it looked pretty normal to me, right? It didn't look like it was out of this world. But I thought it was interesting in the book how it was described that when he pulled it out of the craft, it was almost like it was wedged into the wall or something like that. Almost
it's in a panel. It was in the panel. And one of the circles in the panel is copper.
Right. And so was it actually a part of it, or was it something that in the crash flew into the craft, or was placed there by the army?
No, it was fastened to the wall, the whole bracket, the whole plaque, and the whole plaque with the thing that was turning was, we didn't know that. I mean, we don't know that, but then what happened to the sheep herder? I'm going, well, look, what part of this do you want to throw away? I mean, I can't throw away stuff for the sake that it doesn't make sense.
Of course.
I've got to say, you know, and Jack is looking at this too. You know, here's Remy, and I have him on camera going, the sheepherder wanted to leave my father because these three beings came in through the wall looking for the tesoro, which is the only name they have for that thing.
Yeah.
And then they took it out of there and hid it somewhere else because for 60 years it was hidden. But, you know, people say, you asked the right question, they're kids, and do you believe? Well, 60 years, you're not going to talk about this if you took something. You know, I mean, that's major. And that's not just a little piece, it's a bracket. So maybe what they're hoping is that nobody believes it. So they're just, you know, let's just gloss over that. And the truth is that we're getting the exact testimony, even though it may not make any sense. This is where I really encourage people to read. Stop going on internet and getting all your information. I've got every book of all my colleagues that have just written books. People read Richard Dolan's books, read everybody's books. The irony is that none of our colleagues have reached out to us on this book, you know, because there's so much stuff in here that we could all talk about.
But really quick, because we only have a couple of minutes, Paula. The angel hair that you described, almost like a fiber optic or something. What happened to that? Where's that material?
Well, what happened was that they played with it until Sabrina is the third witness. She was 7 years old. She played with the angel hair, but she also played with long strips of aluminum with when they crunched together, they went back to the same shape. They didn't have toys. So she said that her grandfather had picked that up. So what happened? Well, 60 years went by. Everybody left. The grandparents died and the house burned down. So have we been trying to look for the neighborhood to see if we can get some of this stuff? Yes. We looked to see who was alive. But when we got to Jose, he was 80 in his 80s. So it's really hard. It's very difficult at this time to find people who are still alive in that neighborhood.
Yeah. So it's basically MIA.
Oh yeah. The only thing is we have the bracket and we had we had the bracket, and I don't know what else is buried there. I mean, anymore, we just have the story. There could be stuff, but
I know some testing has been done. Do you expect further testing with more advanced technology to hopefully reveal something interesting about the material?
You're asking me a personal question. I don't think it's ever going to come out. I don't think there is such a thing as disclosure. And I don't think if they found something, they tell you. This is my personal feeling because Gary Nolan and Jacques have done testing on extraterrestrial UFO stuff, and it came out in a peer review in a scientific journal. Nobody's even talking about it. I don't think people are interested in that. They're interested, unfortunately, in sensationalism, where we should be more interested in science and history, and we should be reading more. I mean, in order to do this book, I think Jacques read about 5 books, and I read them with him on World War II and the bomb testing and what was going on in Japan. So the approach should be more academic, Alan. I don't know what to tell you. I don't think anything.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, other than like material that you're able, or researchers are able to get in their hands and do their testing. But like you said, there have been tests of materials that have odd qualities, and yet scientists just go, I don't know what it is, and they ignore it.
Right.
But hopefully, there'll be more Avi Loebs, and maybe Avi Loeb will even continue to evolve in what he brings into his, scientific paradigm. There's so much more to this story, and revisits decades later how the landscape has changed, effects of plant life. But obviously, we don't have time to go into all of that.
No, but I think what you're saying is somebody was watching me there all these years, and they planted poisonous plants on that area. Then we had trouble with that. So toxic plants. So Jacques took samples and took it to Stanford, and I took samples and sent it to the botany department, and it is cocklespur, and it is toxic, and it was never there. The first 5 years, it was never there. So there's a whole bunch of stuff around this.
Okay, and what about documents? Are there any government documents, anything that could link to this event?
Well, only in the Remy Baca testimony of Dixie Lee, the governor of Washington State, and the fact that when you're having an atomic test and something like that happens, you don't know where to send it. I mean, so it's going to go to the atomic energy. There's no Air Force. It doesn't exist.
At the time.
So where are you going to do it? Where are you going to send the files? So it has to do with atomic, and it has to do with nuclear. And I think that the theme of this is that, it's a message to humanity that what were you thinking?
Yeah. Well, everybody go and check out this book. This is the old cover.
This is the old cover.
Trinity, the best kept secret. Jacques Vallée, Paola Harris. And
I know that may not be there, so here's the new cover.
That's the new one. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a nice bright color too, easy to see. Okay, so what would you leave us with? Last words of the evening.
Well, you read my CV, and I'm a teacher. I'm an educator. To read more and source material. If you're doing a research paper for me and you're doing it on Alan Hynek or McDonald or the early days, you better go to the source. Go to the source. Read the source. Do not read people's opinion, what they think it is. It's not about that. It's about documenting history. So for me, Trinity is a history book.
It seems you take that to heart, because when I was asking you certain questions, you do not like to respond to something that is requires your personal opinion. I think that you really do take that to heart, that it's an objective approach, always.
Yes, but I will say, can I end because this is also about me. I have stopped doing a lot of this, and I'm working in Latin America, and I'm more interested in consciousness studies, in consciousness and raising consciousness, because I don't want to do this for nothing. This is not a waste of my life. Yeah. I've realized that what is doing the work here, what Jacques calls it theater, what is trying to get our attention, wants us to raise our consciousness. So I want to go to graduate school. So for me, UFO studies has to be consciousness. So I'm going to Argentina in January, in Chile. I've been to the Atacama Desert twice. That's where the sightings are. That's when the stuff is happening. And I'm kind of backing away from the regular UFO field.
Gotcha. All right, Paola, thank you so much for coming on Coffee and UFO.
Oh, thank you. You got such great questions. And yes, I have my coffee.
All right. Okay. Cheers to all of you for joining us. Thank you so much. As usual, please like, comment, and subscribe on the Mystic Lounge YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mystic Lounge. And if you don't follow the Paranormal Now podcast, check that out as well, in addition to Coffee and UFOs. And actually, I'm going to take a segment of this interview, and I'll be putting that on Paranormal Now podcast as well. Roswell. All right, peace and love to you all, and live in the mystery.